I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. But I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me.
Hello and welcome to Pathways to Parenting Success, a monthly series of panel discussions on topics important to parents and children. I want to thank our partners, Boulder Psychological Services, Boulder Valley School District, and Channel 22. My name is Dan Fox, and I'm a licensed professional counselor here in Boulder, Colorado. We are here tonight to discuss a topic that I have enormous professional and personal interest in, adoption, and specifically adoption parenting challenges. I'm going to introduce our panelists one at a time and give you guys each a chance to talk about the issues that you have expertise in as it relates to adoption. So first panelist, Debbie Meyer. Debbie has been working as a therapist with kids and families since 2003 and specializing in families with infants and toddlers since 2005. She has extensive experience supporting children who have been involved in foster care or kinship placement from the time children are removed from the care of their birth parents, when they live in foster and kinship care, transitioning to an adoptive home, and supporting ongoing adoptive placements. Debbie, you've worked extensively with younger children. I know that as an adoptive parent myself, I need to be thinking about attachment, but I have kids of different ages, a 1-year-old, an 8-year-old. What are the kinds of things that myself and other adoptive parents should be thinking about?
Sure. And I guess just thinking about attachment, what I would say is talking about, for children, we want to work on helping them develop a secure attachment. And so what that means for a child is when a child has a secure attachment, that they are able to feel that they are respected, they're able to feel that they are lovable, they're able to feel that they are worthy, they're able to feel that they can be trusted as well as that they can trust others. And so with that, whether they're 1 or 8 or no matter what the age is, there's different things that families can do to help support their children with that. And again, whether they've been adopted at birth or whether they've been adopted later on too. So there's a program called Circle of Security, and that gives a lot of support around helping parents give some ideas of building that secure attachment and strengthening that secure attachment. They talk about combining the levels of being a bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind parent. So if you were only kind, then the child would be able to do whatever they wanted all the time because you want to be kind to them and let them do what they want to do. But if you were only strong, then you'd be setting really strong boundaries and firm things all the time for them too. So it's the combination of being able to balance out providing them with healthy boundaries, but at the same time also doing it in a very empathic way with them and supporting them. So, by doing those things, and Circle Security also talks about supporting them, exploring, and then also welcoming them back in as they come back. So when we think about that with attachment, with infants, supporting their exploring may be that the infant just kind of looks away a little bit and then they come back again. And when they come back again, that you're ready to welcome them back and support them. As kids start to get older and as they're toddlers, the circle gets a little bit bigger. And so they're going to start wandering a little bit further. And it may be that they're checking something out on the playground and being able to support them, being able to do that, and then coming back and welcoming them back again. So being able to help them with that will provide them with opportunities of when a child does have a secure attachment, it supports them with having better chances of having healthy, pure relationships with friends, with partners down the road, and it's just kind of really a lot of firm foundation and building blocks for them. So whether it's with having a higher self-esteem of wanting to be involved with sports or different academic experiences or different after-school activities that they might be involved with. So with a 1-year-old and an 8-year-old, You know, it's kind of like what you're looking at is ways that you can help them explore around, but then welcoming them back again too, and doing it in a way that they may not have gotten those pieces when they were younger. So whether, I'm not sure when your children were adopted, but whether they were adopted at birth or later on, even at birth, they're still having to create a new attachment with you. You've got a new voice that they aren't used to, a new smell, new senses of surrounding with them. And so wanting to help provide them with an opportunity that they can feel safe within and connected and just feel welcomed and loved and that they are lovable.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for that. Our next panelist is Lorna Benson. Hi. Lorna began her counseling career in 1989 as a counselor to teens in a group home. She's a licensed psychotherapist in private practice here in Boulder. She has extensive experience working with children, adolescents, and families in residential treatment, shelter care settings, and community mental health. In addition to her professional experience, she is also an adoptive mother. Lorna, when we talked a lot about the adoptive journey, you related it to developmental challenges, and I'm curious if you can explain more about how those developmental challenges come up along the way for adopted children.
Well, when we're talking about adopted children being adopted later on, we have questions about what their early experience was like. And as Debbie explained, in early attachment, in the best of circumstances, emotional development builds through the dance of attachment. A baby cries, a parent responds, the child develops the sense that his or her needs will be met. That grows, as Debbie also explained, to their environment, and as they begin to trust their environment, they slowly also begin to trust their sense of self and competence. But in circumstances where kids have been moved around a lot, those experiences are not as secure as their foundation. And sometimes kids, depending on their early experiences, they have what I call the Swiss cheese effect. So if everything is going well and they have that secure attachment, their emotional development goes on par with their developmental age, their chronological age. But with the Swiss cheese effect, while their bodies continue to get older, those little pockets that there are little pockets that happen in their development, emotional development, to learn how to trust themselves, their care, their environment. And until those developmental needs are met, they're going to keep coming up, no matter how old the children are. So as parents adopting an older child, if you can get a lot of information about a child's history and what losses or traumas or transitions may have happened in their history, and you can find out what ages they were at those times, you can have a clue around what how to help them. And so sometimes with those little pockets of Swiss cheese in their emotional development, you may have a 6 or 8-year-old child who is having a temper tantrum like a 3 or a 4-year-old child. The challenge then is, as a parent, to know, wow, that's what they're going back to, and to respond to the child in that manner of the younger emotional need that they have. And with more ability to meet those holes in their development, we can bring them up to their chronological age emotionally much more quickly.
Nice. Thank you. Deborah Cave. Deborah is the executive director of the Colorado Coalition for Adoptive Families, a nonprofit advocacy and information organization supporting Colorado's pre- and post-adoptive and kinship families. She was on the board of directors for the North American Council on Adoptive Children from 2005 to 2013, and she currently represents permanency families on both the Office of Colorado's Child Protection Ombudsman and on the Child Welfare Executive Leadership Council. Deborah and her husband are also the parents of 2 adopted children through Colorado's foster care system. So, Deborah, you've been an advocate for so many adoptive families. I know that you get calls constantly. What kinds of calls are you getting? What kinds of issues are people wanting support with?
We actually answer calls statewide, and we'll try and help anyone that calls, whether they're a kinship placement, kinship family, pre-adoptive, post-adoptive, and that would be also for families who've adopted internationally, private adoptions, or through foster care. And for families who are in the pre-adoptive stage, we usually get questions about what if they need services after the adoption. We get questions on how to advocate for the subsidy negotiation. That's actually probably 50% of our calls. The counties are trained in how to negotiate for an adoption subsidy, but the family comes into the process pretty cold. And there's currently no one that they can turn to unless they find our organization to help them with that process. So we walk them through the pre-adoption subsidy negotiation, what that looks like, how they can come back post-adoption and request services if they need that in the future. When a family has already adopted, we get probably 2 to 3 different categories primarily of questions. One of those is on advocating for the child in the school, what type of services a child needs in the school, how to write an IEP. The type of questions we'll get initially are, we've talked with our educators multiple times, we verbally are asking for this information, we're not getting the services we need. So we actually just start from the basics and say everything has to be in writing. This is what you're allowed to ask for. We'll refer them to organizations that will actually go into the school with them to help them during the IEP process. Another type of question we'll get is, and this is huge, that they may have adopted the child at a young age and the child's done pretty well, and now they're starting to see behavioral and mental health issues crop up. And some families have had bad experiences with therapists. Generally, if they're not adoption competent, they don't understand how adoption can affect a family. They look at the parent as the responsible party if a child is not behaving appropriately. So we try to hook them up with adoption competent therapists in the area, work with them on exactly what type of services they need, what to ask for, how to approach that. A lot of children who receive an adoption subsidy already receive Medicaid, so we talk with them as to whether or not a Medicaid provider is important to them, whether they want to go outside of the Medicaid provider, and what that would mean, and how to approach that. In the really critical cases where a child is whether safety concerns, and the family has approached a county and has not received support in identifying that this is really a critical issue for the child and the family as far as safety goes, I can work with the family on what out-of-home placement means and how those services would best be accessed and what that means as far as the impact to the child and to the family. So those are mostly it. Mental health services are large after adoption. Educational services are huge after the adoption. And working with kinship families as well. They have different sets of needs and issues as well, but working with them as far as getting them as many services as we can. Again, both pre-adoption if they do adopt their child and post-adoption.
Boy, Deborah, thanks. I want to just say again, this is the Colorado Coalition of Adoptive Families, and it's www.cocaf.org.
Yep.
Thanks. Karen Wilding is our final panelist. Karen is an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker. She has over 25 years of experience working with a wide range of clients in private practice. She has raised a family and has personal and professional experience with single parenting, step families, and adoption. Karen worked at September High School in Boulder as the director of counseling for 16 years. She also has extensive experience working in the community with various organizations, Boulder County AIDS Project, Compass House, Boulder Youth Body Alliance, Tibetan Village Project, and Naropa University. Karen, in your work with adolescents and families, I know you've supported a lot of people through the adoption journey. But you are also adopted and you have your own adoption journey. I'm wondering, from that lens, what do you want to share with adoptive parents?
Thanks, Dan. I do feel like the most important thing you said is that it's a journey. It's certainly, from my personal point of view, I can look back and realize that I've been through many stages of my own adoption story, from birth, of being told I was a chosen child and a special child and just wanted, and that held me up through my elementary years. When I got to, oh, then that means somebody abandoned you or didn't want you or rejected you. And so that was the first really grappling point of starting to deal with it at the second stage. And probably the third gigantic leap was in adolescence, when you go, okay, so who am I and who do I want to be? And do I want to be reflective of this family or strike out on my own as who I think I am? So that was a huge, and it was very convenient for adolescent rebellion, really helpful. And then when I was a young adult, I was thinking about having children of my own, and it became important to me to think about where I came from and what kind of kids I might have, and history issues. And then as a much older adult, I started working with adopted kids and realizing some issues that were common. And also in the last 5 or 10 years, it's become possible to do the Human Genome Project, which, since I was in a closed adoption and it was all very shut down then, I did that. So you could say that at 60, I was still on this journey. So that's interesting to me. Another point of view for adoptive parents and adoptive children is that I want it to be known that adoption is not a psychological condition. It's a life condition, and that the traits, the strengths, the characteristics, and the qualities of the child are their own. That doesn't need to be fixed. That sort of, when it's a psychological condition, it seems to want to be cured. That's not a great framework to work with adoption from my point of view. So I do think it comes up and can cause stress or distress in a family and in children themselves over time in different ways. And I'll just say one more thing. I think there are 3 big areas which come up in different, according to the age of the child, and their abandonment. So that could be that kids don't like transitions of any kind whatsoever. They don't like new things. They don't like things they don't know. So they need a lot of structure. Or they're afraid to attach, as Debbie and Lorna were talking about, that not trusting. The second one is identity issues, which I briefly addressed. That comes up in early adolescence, and you see a lot of acting out around that and testing and requiring parents to be very steady, and very even more so than in a normal situation. That was a bad word. So it's a testing period for the parents and the children. And the third issue is the issue of belonging. That as soon as a child starts to grapple with the idea that they were adopted, they're also grappling with the idea of where do they belong, where do they fit, who are they like. And since most adopted children, the mirroring is not perfect. It could be racial, it could be foreign adoptions, it could be just basic differences, like you're an artistic child adopted into a family of lawyers. It's kind of you're looking for somebody like you. So that's just a factor that goes on in and out.
Thank you. We're going to start off with some questions. I have a scenario that I want to share with you guys and get your input on it. Also, as a viewing audience, you can submit questions. If you're viewing at home, you can go to the website, boulderpsychologicalservices.com, and click on the link on our homepage. And for those of you in our live audience, please feel welcome to fill out a card with your question, and you can participate in the discussion that way. So here's the scenario. I just came across this like 2 days ago, and it seems so, just poignant. After years of trying to have their own child, Janet and Jim finally adopted Kim, an adorable Korean girl who had spent her first 2 years in foster care after her birth mother had given her up at birth. Janet and Jim were bursting with joy when they arrived home with Kim, eager to experience the rewards of being loving parents. It wasn't long, however, before they both began experiencing extremely unsettling feelings of deep disappointment and an almost unspeakable sense of being misled, almost duped. Kim rarely smiled at them and often went into a deep rage over the littlest things. She resisted their hugs, but later would jump on them when they weren't looking and cling as if for dear life. Their expectations of what parenting was going to be like were being violated every day in multiple ways. By the time they had had Kim for a year, they were both feeling resentful and were having great difficulty feeling empathic toward their complicated daughter. So if parents like Janet and Jim came across your doorstep, what would you be telling them? What kinds of things are important for them? What do you think? Lorna, nice, thanks.
I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, the adoption is a commitment. And when we adopt children, we have to claim them. They are ours. No different than if we birthed them. And we don't know what circumstances might lurk around the corner. And so one of the thoughts that I have when you describe that situation is I would, it could be an adoption issue. It could be lack of stimulation in the foster home. At the same time, I'm wondering if an evaluation for autism spectrum with the lack of eye contact and reciprocity. In either circumstance, parenting is hard, and there are no guarantees, no matter when or how.
Yeah, thanks. Boy, I like that idea of claiming your child. Mm-hmm. Deborah, you had something?
I think it's important for families to realize that they're not alone in this. Usually after I've received this type of a call and the families are really desperate, and after I've talked with them, they almost across the board, they say, thank you, I didn't realize there were others that were experiencing this as well. When you go into adoption, you don't want to fail. You usually don't make that process. It's a long process, and you usually feel confident by the end of it, and you don't want to fail. So it actually takes a while sometimes for families to realize that they actually need help and that it's not their fault and it's not the child's fault, but they need to reach out and get help. I'm not necessarily a support group person, but I do refer families to support groups if that's how they feel more comfortable. For myself, I need to get information, so I'll refer families to workshops, families that they can talk to to reach out to, and then definitely a psychological evaluation for the child, whether it's educational, mental health type eval, but definitely starting reaching out, realizing they're not alone, and they shouldn't be isolated. They need to reach out and get help for this.
Thanks, great. Yeah, Debbie.
Yeah, I was just also going to add on, really piggybacking on both what Deborah and Lorna were talking about also, is the value also for the parents to, it's hard when you have a child to find time for yourself. But when you're able to, for the parents to in some way, even if it's that they really enjoy doing crossword puzzles, or they really enjoy taking a walk, of doing something even for maybe like 10 minutes that day, just something where they can just get a little bit of downtime and just get a breather space as they're able to try to build up their, just kind of like store up their energy to be able to go in for whatever the next event is that's going to happen, whatever behaviors they may be facing. So when it's possible to find ways, maybe it's listening to music that they really like to listen to while they're driving in the car, just ways that can maybe be incorporated into the daily day too, of day-to-day events for themselves, to just sort of get some support. And that's kind of, along the lines of what Deborah was talking about too, of reaching out to help the parents get that support. And then also I think, along the lines of, for children who have been adopted, as we've been talking about already, the different attachment pieces that can come up, it's not uncommon for a child to push someone away if they, if the child themselves are going through, Karen did such a wonderful job of kind of talking about some of the experiences, and thank you for sharing, Karen, to help us understand a little bit more. So if they aren't sure if someone's going to really be there, it's like this, they may not even be at the cognitive level of being able to process the notion of, well, hang on, this person wasn't there for me the whole time, but are you really going to be there? So sometimes it's not uncommon that kids will have behaviors that push someone away because it feels emotionally safer for them than to be concerned that they are going to be left again or lost again. And so it feels safer. So having that evaluation done to help understand where the behaviors are coming from. If it is something more on the attachment level, if it may be something on the autism spectrum, if there may be something else that's going on for that child, so that the parents then have a much broader resource of knowing how to kind of translate the behaviors to give them just a sense of resource of understanding their child better.
So I want to look at a specific behavior that I think comes up a lot for parents as something that just kind of strikes at the core and is very hard to figure out how to work with. And that's the statements of, "You're not my real parents," or "I don't want to go to this family reunion because that's not my real family." Those kinds of things, which as a parent, I think you're caught in this, well, I want to support my child in these really challenging feelings, and that one also tends to really hit home for adoptive parents. So what do you think is helpful with those kind of behaviors? What would you suggest to parents? Karen.
One of the very most important things for an adopted child to know is that they're not going to destroy these parents. And they're not going to just take out the family by having feelings like that. So I would hope that the parents could be lighthearted. You're not my real parents. I don't want to go with you. They're just, and be light and humorous. If you can hold on to your sense of humor and your sense of knowing you are their parents, they know you're their parents, and you go, well, I'm the best parents you got right now, and we're going. Or, I love you, and we're just going to do this, and walk right kind of past it, over it. On the other hand, then when you're not in the heat of it, to sit down and go, geez, that sounded really like you were up against something. Is it hard for you to go to family things? Is it hard for you on birthdays, which can be hard, anniversaries? So it's a good question to ask, but usually not when the kid is full-blown acting out at you.
Nice, thanks. You nailed that one, so we're going to move on. So I would like to show a video that is this wonderful opportunity for us to look at an author who wrote the book, The Primal Wound. And we're going to do that in about 10 seconds because our buddy Ferris is going to help out. We'll watch that, and then I'd like to get your guys' comments on what the impressions were that you had about the video.
When I wrote The Primal Wound in 1993, I felt there was a real dearth of information about how a child was affected by the separation from the birth mother. And actually, when I first wrote it, it was a thesis for my master's degree in 1986. And it was after I had given a talk at the American Adoption Congress conference down in Garden City, California, that I had a lot of people telling me, you need to write this in a book because we need to outline it and absorb it, you know. And people need to know about this because a lot of people felt very understood when they heard me talking about the legacy of having been given up for adoption and being separated from the birth mother. I do believe that there's a little bit more awareness of that primal wound and how babies are affected by being separated from mother, and not just when they're adopted, but by being in incubators when they're first born, by having parents decide they're going on a 2-week vacation without the baby when it's 2 months old, or those kinds of things are going to affect the child because children that young, babies that young, don't understand about permanency. And so they are fearing that the mother is gone forever whenever she's gone. For adoptees, there's an extra thing that happens for them because not only does mother never come back, but they are put into a family where they may have very few traits in common. And so they have to, from the very beginning of their lives, begin to adapt to something that may not feel very congruous with what they feel inside. And so they have that first tremendous trauma of the separation from the birth mother. And then they have the ongoing kind of chronic trauma of trying to figure out how to be every day of their lives in that family. And I don't think people really understand very much about that. You know, as far as the parents are concerned, they love the child. They want the child to feel as if they're a member of the family. They consider them a member of the family. And they don't think very much about how different the child may really be. And I think part of that comes from our belief that the nature versus nurture kind of thing, where if we just nurture them in the right way, then they're going to be just like us. Well, of course, they do become more and more like us, but that means they become less and less maybe like themselves.
Thanks. Boy, I have a lot of feelings about that as an adoptive parent, but I'd love to kick it to you guys. What do you think? Who wants to give us your reaction? I bet you all want to go, so let's just start with... All right, I'll say my 2 cents real quick, which is that on the one hand, I like what she's saying about this original, like, there is this separation that happens at birth, and I get that. But as an adoptive parent, when they start to talk about ongoing chronic trauma and just how to be in this family and that there's this you are different feeling, and you know, and she says it, she's like, you know, they want to go towards the nurture, and I do. I feel like, you know what, like, they are part of our family. They're every bit a part of our family, just like our non-adopted children, and it strikes that way. So I'm having a hard time kind of balancing. Yeah, Karen.
I think both those things are true at the same time. My issue with that is about the primal wound. I don't like the words. I don't like the idea of being wounded like that. It feels like somebody stabbed you or something. I mean, that's not the right language for me. Loss is okay, abandonment's okay, but that wounding, that means, I don't know. Anyway, the other part of it that you're reacting to about that the kids feel different, in my experience, that is true. Adopted kids do feel different, and since that's me, I don't really know if all kids don't feel different from their parents, which I think they probably do. But I do think it's helpful if the parents look at the strengths of that kid as different than them. Not, you're just like us, and you're just smart like we are, and you're, you know, athletic like your dad. Instead, if you go, gosh, you are really good at making friends. You are really good at doing something that's unique to that child. I think that's incredibly confirming of their own feelings of difference.
I think another thing, and I'm not sure exactly when the video was from, but some of the recent research that has come up about the brain and how people are able to, how the brain is more plastic, and that the brain is able to do create new connections that maybe in the past we thought, well, once this happened, you know, that you would never be able to repair from having that experience. But now there's so much knowledge of that, that even if someone went through an experience that was traumatic for them when they were younger, so as we're talking about adopted kids, and, you know, as creating a new attachment with someone, that they are able to create those new senses and that they are able to feel that. So even if, you know, that they are in a home where they are adjusting, you know, and feeling these senses of who am I and how do I belong and what's my role here and how do I want to be, the experiences that they've gone through, they are still able to have this sense of kind of repair, this sense of just because they lost an attachment with one individual doesn't mean that they can't create an attachment with another person. And I think that's important to remember too. And my sense with the video was that it felt as if they would never be able to create this sense of connection with another person is kind of part of what it felt like when she was talking at some points in time. And I think it's important to know that you are able to create those connections again, that the brain is able to create those connections again.
Thanks. You know, I want to go a little farther with this, which is that in terms of helping adoptee children find that sense of belonging, I've heard a lot about this idea of, you know, you want to help them with their adoption story, and maybe they have a journal that they're keeping about, you know, significant moments, you're keeping it for them of their adoption story. And at the same time, I've had families who come and they say, oh, but, you know, we haven't told her this, and now she's a teenager, whatever this special detail is, because it just feels really painful, and they're wanting to protect their kids and not have them go through what's, you know, potentially a re-traumatizing experience. So where's the line there? What about our adoption stories? What about, you know, telling our children what they've really experienced, where they come from, even if it's difficult? What do you guys think? Deborah.
With my daughter, we were very open with her about her adoption from the time that she came into our home. But she never said anything about it. She was very quiet. She'd listen and then look away, and we'd stop and bring it up again when it was appropriate. And when she was 5 years old, we were playing Barbies, which I can't stand Barbie, but we were playing Barbies. And my Barbie was in the house, and there was a knock at the door, and her Barbie was outside, and I said, come on in. And I said, well, who are you? And she goes, I'm Birth Mom Barbie. And I said, oh, really? I said, how are you doing? And she goes, I don't know. I don't even know what I look like. And she started crying. And it really hit home that even if she's not talking about it, she's thinking about it. And it's always there. It's part of her perception of who she is. And not to acknowledge it is going to cause her great harm. So I really think it's important to be honest with the child, to talk about it developmentally as they become older and can take in more things. It might be painful, but it's better that they know from you, I think, than from someone else. And it was interesting, sometimes she doesn't want to talk about it at all. We haven't really celebrated her adoption day the last several years because she didn't seem to be in a place where she wanted to acknowledge that. And then about 3 months ago, she asked why we hadn't celebrated her adoption day this year. So I told her we'll have a huge blowout next year instead. But I have to take the feedback from her, but I'm always as open as I can be with her about her adoption story.
Thanks.
That's so wonderful, and I think so important as well. I think it's important for kids to know and understand their story and going back to where they belong in the world. And I think it's so important to have a life book where there are mementos and stories and pictures that chronicle the journey, because it is a journey for the children. It's also the journey for the family. And to have something that they can look back to and reference to give them a sense of their place in the world can be so important. And I think in the circumstance that you were talking about with a teenager not having been told, that is just such a sticky place to find yourself. And, I mean, I think it's also very generational. It used to be generations ago where nobody ever talked about it, and once they were adopted, it was as if they were born, and we've learned that that creates some of its own challenges.
Thanks. I want to dig more into teenagers here. So adolescents are going through this search for identity, and adoption affects people's identity and their understanding of themselves. So do we have the perfect storm when we have teenagers who are adopted, or what hope is there for these parents, myself included? I'm going to eventually call on you, Karen, since you've worked a lot with teens.
I do agree that it is the perfect storm, actually. It's sort of a great phrase, and you should remember this for Maya. It's all children are moving toward identity, toward creating a self that will work in the world. And adopted kids often have two choices. The parents nurture, the parents who are raising them and are good people and are being kind and wonderful, and their fantasy or reality of their birth parents who have challenges that are different. So often it's a perfect time to pick one or the other and go, okay, I'm going to try that. And you have lots of adopted kids who go out and they try criminal stuff, they try alcohol and drug use and go, maybe I'm bad. Maybe I'm really bad, and it's a good time to be very protective. It's a good time to jump in and go, I want you to be safe. I know that you feel you need to do this. I am here to take care of you. You can rail against me, but I need you to be safe, and that's my job.
Thanks. Anybody else before we show the next video? Anybody else want to comment on teens and adoption? Teens and adoption. It happens, then they become adults. Ferris, we're going to show the next clip. This is a video on a young woman who is putting together this wonderful vignette for her birth mother.
Dear birth mother, although I've never met you, I've been grateful to you all my life. I'm saving to go to Korea to begin a search for you, in hopes that someday I can thank you face to face. I was adopted into a loving family and grew up in the country, planting vegetables with my mom, hiking with my dad, and riding bikes with my brother and sister. Today I live in San Francisco in a tiny apartment with my husband Seth. I wish you could have seen our fairy tale wedding. It wasn't fancy, but it was meaningful, as we celebrated the story we're living in. Though you couldn't be part of the wedding, I'm glad you were part of my story. When I learned you went to art school, the only thing I know about you, I wondered what else we might have in common. Do you look like me? Do you tend to overanalyze things? Is it hard for you to throw anything away? I hope someday these questions can be answered. I'm doing all I can to make it happen. But if it can't, I hope you'll still know how much I appreciate you. Thank you for this gracious gift of life, Alexa.
Boy, I really like that because it's an example of someone who is really processing in a healthy way her adoption journey and really seeing it as a journey. And one of the things that I've experienced sometimes with adoptive parents, and I can feel it, the energy in myself too, is this idea of like, well, we talked about adoption and it's kind of like, we're over that, it's resolved. And I think this is a good example of, no, it's an ongoing experience. What's your guys' take on it? What did you notice or like about the video? What kind of reaction did you have? Lauren.
I thought it was a beautiful video. It showed this young woman who was able to feel like there was a connection and a gratitude with her birth mother, yet at the same time felt clearly well attached to her family, was able to talk about it, process it, grow through it, and through the beautiful attachments that she was able to make in her family, was able to carry that forward and create a family of her own. And that it's a hopeful scenario.
Thanks. Deborah?
In watching that as an adoptive parent, I think I would give the adoptive family a tremendous amount of credit, because I don't think the young woman could be where she's at if she didn't have the support of her adoptive family, siblings and parents, supporting her on this journey. So I think she's done an amazing job, and I'm very grateful for the family that she's with to give her that option and that opportunity.
That's great.
Very true.
Debbie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that it also shows how she really incorporates all aspects of her life there together, and just kind of talking, the conversation about teenagers and figuring out who they are, and how she was given information about her birth mother so that she could incorporate that into her own story of wondering about for herself, are there some similarities or not. And although she had only a little bit of information about her birth mother, it was something that she was really, it really shows how she really held on to it and valued that piece of information. When we were talking earlier about whether to share information or not, it just seemed to me to really speak to that, of how important that she really seemed to value that, of knowing that, of just a little part of where did I come from, and what were you like, and am I similar to you or not? And yeah.
I want to dig a little more into birth mothers, and the thing that I'm curious about is that I've experienced a lot of situations where older adolescents or early adults who have been adopted are actively seeking out and regularly finding on Facebook or through some other social media their birth mother. And that's been a process that's sometimes independent from their adoptive family. And I'm wondering what we can tell parents, adoptive parents, about that journey, and how they can help their child when they have that real need to kind of figure out who is this person, how can I find out about them. Karen?
Well, just first of all, when researchers have looked into this and when they were asked how many adoptees search, the answer was 100%. So we're not talking about search on the internet and find, we're just talking about search. So as that beautiful video showed, it could be it could be just an exercise in thinking about it and writing it down and searching in yourself and projecting that and thanking that person, all without actually that person needing to be there. So the search could be real and followed through, or the search could be just within one's mind and one's heart and oneself. And I think that's important to remember, and if parents can remember to support that, because it's a drive that all kids will have, that they'll have a good success, and just go, when you're ready, if you would like my help, or if you would like me to be there with you, I'm happy to do it. And let them lead, as you said earlier, with your daughter.
Thanks. Yeah, Deborah?
With my son, we actively seeked out, found his birth mother, sought, and found his birth mother, and she was living out of state, and our son was adopted when he was older, and I don't think he was ever able to accept his adoption very well. He's probably doing a little bit better now at the age of 25, but I think we paid on 3 separate occasions for him to go out of state and stay with his birth mom. He came back when he was ready. We offered to do it again, and 3 separate times he did that. He has established a connection, not as healthy as I was hoping it would be, but we couldn't stand in his way, and we would never have thought of standing in his way. With our daughter, we tell her that when she is old enough, when we can do it, we'll definitely do that, but that we will probably start looking way before it's legal to do that, because I know how important it is to her, and we will do everything we can to support her in that journey. we will protect her. And if it's not safe for her to get in contact with a birth parent, then we will have to put in the bounds at that point. And maybe when she's older, it will be safe, or she can at least protect herself if she makes contact. But we understand how important it is, and we will support her in the need to do that.
Boy, that's great. I love that piece around safety too, because I've heard that a lot from adoptive parents, that they worry about what the birth mother might be into or her lifestyle choices, and there's this hesitancy to allow that contact to happen. And I love how you talked about the safety and managing that until she's able to manage it herself. All right, we're moving on. So, adoption, right, in and of itself, we've already talked about that, sense of belonging and identity, and that's challenging for the adoptive child. What about when we're working with transracial adoptions, kids that are from other countries, kids that are from other races than the birth parents? I'm asking this for me, basically, so,
Well,
Karen.
Why, I'd like to hear what you have to say about it, actually, a little bit. And
I've looked into this a lot, and the thing that actually was I think the most helpful for me was there's a book on transracial adoption that really encourages us as adoptive parents to go out into the community of our children's culture. So we want to experience what it's like to be a minority in another culture, and at the same time experience what their culture's like, so that we can help them to experience that and share it in a meaningful way. As kids get older, finding other kids that have similar experiences to create that sense of belonging, finding older mentors that look like them is a really helpful piece of it. And I feel like, boy, I can't understate the importance of going into an experience where you're the only white person. I just think that's so important, to be able to feel what that feels like and then realize that your small child is going through that experience too. And then that's basically fine, and we have a loving community, but it's different. And there's things that I can take for granted or ignore as a person in the dominant majority that my children can't. And so it's been a very eye-opening process that way. So I'm going to just ask another question, since I answered the last question that I asked. I want to look into some of the details about older children and adoptions that happen at that point, and some of the challenges that have come up either in developmental issues or in terms of the social service process. And I'm wondering if, Deborah, you might be able to lead us off, because you've been working with some of those families in the situations where they are involved in social services.
I think from talking with families and actually having adopted an older child myself with significant mental health issues, the best thing that a county can do is support the family and have a working relationship with the family. There's so many families that the county, when they adopt, they go their own way, and I think at that time they're ready to do that. But an adoption is lifelong, and we're adopting children that we may need significant services for and with, and both for the family themselves. Working with our son was extremely difficult on our marriage. It was, I can't tell you, my son would target me all day. He would be hitting me, he would be following me around the house screaming, he would be swiping objects off the table. The second my husband would walk in the door, he'd run down to the door and say, "Daddy, I've been really mean to Mommy all day, I'm so sorry." And my husband would pick him up and say, "That's exactly what we want to hear, we're so proud of you." And I'm in the kitchen ready to kill them both. And it took about 6 months to realize how he was surviving by splitting us and still trying to be the dominant one in the family and controlling both of his parents to the point where he was literally splitting us apart. And I think if a family feels safe coming back to social services saying, "This is what's happened, we really need help to keep this child in our home," and the services are there, and it's identified at the time the family comes. I had a really bad experience where we called for help, and over the weekend, tried to keep our child out of the hospital, out of being hospitalized, And that Monday, a worker came to our home, knocked on the door. She'd already been at the school to interview the child at school, and then they came to our house unannounced, even though I called that morning to ask for help again and wanted to be there. So when the worker came, I could work with them as quickly as possible to get the services my child needs. So I think that there can be disconnects in social services between intake and post-adoption. And I think if those two entities work together to identify a family coming in as an adoptive or a kinship family, and can get them into the services as quickly as possible, so that the family feels supported. I never hear, when I'm first contacted by families, I want to dissolve this adoption. I never hear that. I hear it 6 months later when I've worked with that family to try to get them services they need for their child, to keep that child in the home. So if it can be a partnership, it's a partnership when that family comes in for foster care, because the county wants to find a placement for that child and support that placement to adoption. If that can continue post-adoption, I think it gives the placement the best chance of success.
Thanks. I'm going to state your website again. It's www.cocaf.org, COCAF. And there's a lot of these resources on the website that people can either call you or look on the website to find out more.
Okay.
Thanks. Boy, folks, oh, Debbie, you want to say something before we wrap? Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to mention about with when a child comes in to an adoptive home when they're older and that they've been involved in the social services or foster care system, it may be common that that child has had multiple placements that they have lived in. And so I think, as we're talking about the child's story and their narrative, and as Lorna talked about understanding the experiences that they've gone through, that is an important piece to remember too. So with each separate placement that this child has lived in, those are different attachments they've had to try to create again themselves. And so their coping skills, when children have the different behaviors, they are functioning at the way that they have found that they feel protects them the most that they can. These are the skills that they've developed to try to help themselves. They feel like it's helping, even though it may not be the most healthy skill in the long run. But when you've gone through different placements, which may be something that older children have gone through, that there may be stronger protective skills that they're having. So that notion of wanting to kind of push someone away of, how do I know that you're really going to be able to take care of me? Because this person didn't, or this person didn't, or this place didn't, or this place didn't. And how do I know that you're really going to be able to? So there's a lot of testing of trust that can happen. And that's something that I've seen in working with older children that have been involved within the foster care system for a number of years in their life.
Thank you. Folks, we've got to wrap up. I want to mention a couple of talks that we have upcoming. The Boulder Psychological Services Organization does talks in libraries in Broomfield on October 21st. From 6:30 to 8 p.m. in the Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Library. We have a topic called Parenting Successfully in a Blended Family. The next talk at the Louisville Library is on October 15th. From Roommates to Soulmates, Enhancing Couples' Relationships. And at the Meadows Branch Library in Boulder on November 5th, we have Are You an Exhausted Caregiver? Steps You Can Take to Revive Yourself. And on Channel 22, next month, the topic is Are Holidays Stressful? Reduce Family Conflict Over Indulging and Seasonal. I'm going to read that again. Reduce family conflict over indulging and seasonal moodiness. That's on November 4th, and that's from 7 to 8 o'clock on Channel 22. I want to thank our panelists. I really appreciate all the experience and wisdom that you brought to this, both for myself personally and for our audience. I want to thank the live audience, our home viewers. We really appreciate your time and hope that this has been helpful. Thanks to our sponsors, Boulder County Healthy Youth Alliance, Boulder Psychological Services, Boulder Valley School District, Centennial Peaks Hospital, the Daily Camera, the Hope Coalition, the Parent Engagement Network, and the Temple Grandin School. You can find out more about all of the BPS community partner events, as well as previously aired programs by visiting boulderpsychologicalservices.com. Thank you, and have a good night.
And now the planet started bowing down. And Soon the growth returns to follow ground. But I know what's churning underneath the snow. And I love my baby, and we've miles to go. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Be with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? So wait a while, winter time. Wait a while, winter time.